Hello, Greg Wise. Welcome to the Therapy Works podcast.
Thank you.
I feel like I know you because I've watched your movies, seen you on Strictly, read your books, but of course it's very different being with you in person. And I was thinking about all of your different kind of roles and identities as an actor, a writer, a campaigner, partner, a dad. You make things with wood. What's that? A wood maker?
A wood maker?
A wood chopper.
I think God makes wood. I play with wood. Yeah.
You play with wood. So you're a man of very varied kind of skills and interests. And it feels like you've always wanted to kind of open a door to another learning.
Yeah.
That you don't stay in one place.
No.
That you want to travel internally, which takes you places externally.
Absolutely. And more so now, I only want to do things I don't know I can do.
That's really interesting. What's
that's
that
important.
about?
It's many things, but I think the main drive of it was the time I spent as the full-time carer for my sister as she was dying. And that brought along with it, obviously, the feeling that life is arbitrary. We don't know the timescale of our own lives. We don't know our possibilities until we are asked by life, by the higher power, by fate, by whatever else. And I think any way I brought into that, and I've carried away from that I have an idea in myself and the way I live that real life, real creativity happens at the edges, always at the edges of possibility. As an actor, I've been fortunate. I've been very lucky over, 33 years now. I've been very fortunate to play an awful lot of roles. I don't feel any need to revisit any of those. And a lot of things that come in to me because of the way I look and the way I sound and everything else are certain archetypes.
Typecast.
But for me, it was important to see where the boundaries lie. And I think as a child does, see where the walls are, see what the possibilities, what the repercussions are. That's all I want to do now, is see where the boundaries lie. And I have never sat down and physically written a book before. The book that was published came from a blog. And now I'm undertaking the terrifying prospect of sitting with a blank piece of paper and a blank screen and writing a personal story. And I don't know if I can do it, but that's the point.
The question I always asked, full-time caring for your sister Claire when she was dying at a very young age, in her 50s.
Yeah, 51.
51, of breast cancer that then became bone cancer.
Yeah.
It kind of forced you to see reality as it is, rather than reality as we'd like it to be, which is that we are all mortal, we're all going to die, and that most of us choose, I think, for understandable reasons, to live in blissful ignorance that somehow death happens to other people.
Yeah, it's optional.
It's optional. But I think as painful and, I imagine, incredibly debilitating and in many levels traumatizing that was, it opened you in a way to want to live knowing that you're going to die. And that's the marginal place you're talking about. That if I die tomorrow, I want to know before I die that I've lived as fully as I can live. And living fully means for you, it wouldn't mean for all of us, testing yourself, writing a book when I've never written one, dancing when I've never danced. Is that?
It is. It is a bit more chronic than that. My best friend was killed when we were in our mid-20s. So Simon. So I had that moment. We all had that moment when we were immortal and we knew everything. Yeah. When everything is possible, everything's opening out. And Simon
and everyone else is stupid.
And everyone else is stupid. And we have the glorious courage of lack of life knowledge, which is great, which is fantastic and absolutely appropriate. But Simon, who was the most alive person I'd ever met at that time, was killed. And that brought with it straight away the idea of you either go nihilistic with it or you try and find a purpose from the loss. And I had to take myself away and reassess. I retired 2.5 years into being a professional.
Australia.
And I went to Australia. And I couldn't grieve at all. I was in a pure state of shock.
Or trauma, I mean.
What trauma?
So that you were kind of fixed, like amber.
Frozen completely within that.
There.
And I started weeping on the straightest road I've ever been on, in the largest country I'd ever been in the red centre of Australia, in the Northern Territories. And I'm exploring that a little bit now. I think it was a profound awe response. And it was the physical manifestation of the awe of where I found myself physically, with the mental awe of death, because death is awful. And you can't get your head around it. That's the thing about awe. You can't comprehend it. Nothing of your life to that moment has brought anything that will make sense of this. And I found myself in that situation in the landscape. And it's my theory that that's what provoked, that's what finally allowed the grief, finally allowed myself to submit myself to the awe of it all.
Because what was going through my mind as you were talking is, rather than awe being awful, is that it is actually the very opposite of trauma, that it releases you from... So trauma is when your whole system is overwhelmed and you kind of freeze because you can't process it. And I think, as you're describing awe, what that brings to me is that you, rather than submit, you surrender. You open yourself
completely
to powerlessness
Yeah.
in the sense of, as a gift, of giving yourself up to this extraordinary landscape that has been there for millennia, and you're just a little ant kind of, having your day. But when you can stop trying to master, control and wrestle it down to the ground and free yourself, then you can more fully engage in the present that you're in and the reality that you're going to die.
That's it. And I continually chase awe now. I do a lot of winter mountaineering, used to do a lot of rock climbing. And for me, there is nothing more awesome than a mountain.
Do you do it dangerously? I have this awful feeling that you seek danger and you're going to die like your friend or drowned, that you're going to fall down and crack your head.
So you have to exhibit self-care. The mountain doesn't care. You care for it. You want to be with it. You want to be on it. If the day goes well, you want to climb to the top of it, but you don't have to. It doesn't matter. But it has no care for you. So you have to practice extreme self-care for yourself and for whoever you're climbing with. And you have to hope that they're also as careful about you. And I think that's probably the physical manifestation of what I'm trying to do mentally as well, is go to the edge, go to a dangerous edge, because you have to practice self-care, you have to practice self-belief. And I know with my sis, the time spent with her as she was dying was a similar experience of awe.
A sort of liminal space, isn't it?
It's absolutely, completely. And you're in that bardo space, the Buddhist bardo space as well. And I think with the supplication that comes from it, also other things are discovered. I don't know if you know Abraham Maslow,
Hierarchy
peak
of
experiences. He did this wonderful study in the 1960s. And I think peak experiences you can call awe. And it chimes in with what's now being looked at with looking at post-traumatic growth. And the post-traumatic growth inventory is almost the same as the Maslow's peak experiences. But you have to have witnessed that awe, or you have to have found yourself in a space that you have no power over, no comprehension over, to find where your power and where your comprehension appear.
So for people listening, post-traumatic growth comes from research, first of all in America, but then here, Stephen Joseph here, which says it never denies the horror of the traumatic event and the level of the loss. But what it has shown, that with some people, that when they have found that they've survived what they thought would kill them, that their gratitude for life expands, what matters to them in life, and so their perception of what's important changes much more to do with love than, say, money. Yeah. And that they find that they're stronger than they believe they would ever be.
That's it.
And so that they never deny how awful what's happened, but they actually feel that experience has grown them. And I think that's what you're saying.
Completely.
And what I'm curious about is, sibling loss in the kind of grief world that I've navigated for decades is often siblings who've been bereaved of a sibling are often called the invisible mourners, because it's the parents or the partners that kind of get primary mourner attention. So you've really raised awareness of how important, how significant a sibling loss is, that you two were kind of each other's buddies through life and each other's wingman, maybe incredibly close. But most people who have a sibling die then don't become campaigners.
No.
So I'm curious, going back pre-Simon to your childhood and to what I've assumed is quite an old-fashioned... What is it about your childhood that has led you to be someone who is writing now a book on grief, who's been campaigning since your sister's death? Because it's the roots often
It's
is the
absolutely
answer.
the roots, and it's not my roots. It's my mum's roots and her mum's roots and my dad's roots and his dad's roots. I've been fortunate enough to be able to explore generational grief and trauma, and the patterns are exquisitely repeated every generation.
Exquisitely in agonising.
In absolute of abandonment and conflict.
Of rupture and rupture and
Rupture
never
and
repair.
rupture, yeah. Of children sent away.
Give
at
me
5.
some stories.
My grandmother was Croatian. My grandfather was Transylvanian on my mum's side.
That sounds like a kind of
Yeah.
a Grimm's fairy story.
They were all.
in and of
It was
itself.
all the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. So they
Right.
were both born in the late 1800s. His Emil, my Transylvanian grandfather, was brought up in a well-to-do house. His mother left his father when Emil was a year old
Which is
because
unheard
he
of
was
in
such a bully, such a martinet. He was cruel. He was then
Your grandfather
my
was an martinet.
grandfather's father.
So your great-grandfather was the
Yeah.
martinet.
So my grandfather Emil's mother just left, couldn't stand it, and left her child with the bully,
Christ.
who then bullied the father, bullied the son. Eventually, he managed to escape after university and went to Paris. Eva, my grandmother, her father, again, brought up in a reasonably well-to-do house, but her father was a gambler and they lost everything. And Eva, who was the second child of 10 eventually, but there was only 2 at the time, her and her elder sister. So when she was 5, she was sent away to another country, to her grandparents.
Like
She had to
posted.
learn a new language. She had to live with her grandparents. She was allowed home once a year to meet a new sibling. This is my grandmother. She then, and they were Jewish, she then found her way to Vienna, became the mistress of a scissor factory owner. Isn't that great? There's a scissor factory.
There's a movie here.
There's a movie
definitely
there.
a movie here.
And in her late 30s, left and escaped to Paris. So 2 escapees from very troubled childhoods met in Paris. Emile, who was, I think, 8 years younger than Eva. Eva was just about to turn 40 when they got married. And they had one child, my mother, in Paris.
This is before the Second World War?
This is 1932 when my mum was born.
And she was Jewish, he wasn't.
She'd become Roman Catholic because in Austria in the early
You had this
1930s, you
impossible
realise
choice.
that it's
Yeah.
probably not the best thing to
Yeah.
be Jewish. My father's lot, North British miners, railway workers,
Lancashire, no.
what's now kind of Teesside,
You
County
come
Durham.
from. Yeah.
As far as I'm aware from his writings, everybody in the community was completely traumatized by poverty, by fractured relations.
By the jobs, the
the
mining.
whole place was populated by sour aunts who looked like they'd been weaned on pickle, was what my dad wrote.
Wow.
His aunt dying a virgin after 66 years of marriage.
Oh my God. Is that Effie Gray?
You know, his other aunt and uncle ran a shop together, hadn't talked to each other in nearly 20 years. All the men mute, all the women
Furious.
furious and
Exploding.
combative,
Yeah. God.
and no money.
So terrified as well.
And they were also part of, coming back to Ruskin, educating the working man. So they became part of the miners' education, going to night school, beseeching my dad to get a proper education and leave this life. And he managed to escape. And he was the first kid ever to go to university. And he became one of the youngest professors in the country.
Good
But
for him.
He,
Wow.
he escaped. Within all of that, the pressure put upon him by his family to keep everything stable when he was a child. Because when he was 16, his then 40-year-old mother had twins in the middle of the war and completely fell apart. And so Dad became responsible for these babies for cooking his father's tea because the father obviously didn't cook.
No.
The mother couldn't get out of bed. She took herself away.
So he became what's called a parentified child.
So he became that, and that was his lot in life from there on. But
he had
brought
to
up
shut down everything in himself
completely
to function.
And for whatever reason, these two, fueled in a similar way by being escapees. Now, the thing with my mum is they came over in the early 1930s to the north of England. War broke out. They only just managed not to be interred. They were classed as enemy aliens, and Mum was sent away at 7, almost the same age as her mum had been sent away 4.5 decades before. So she finds herself in a boarding school with a German name, being accused of being a spy, not knowing anything completely, and her parents not able to come and visit because they needed papers from the police, which was almost impossible to get. They had to hand in their radio and their camera because they were enemy aliens. So we see these patterns.
And the shards that are in you, what do you recognise?
Well, the shards that are in me, for whatever reason my parents decided it was a good idea to get married. These two escapees.
The aspects of yourself that you want to kind of escape from. And you think, well, I know this, so maybe this is where my happiness lies.
Yeah. But from almost the get-go, it was
Misery. So the shards in you?
The shards in me are undoubted love from parents, but huge resentment.
Oh, resentment. No.
Well, my sister had the life my mum wanted, so that was the tricky one. My mum was a very good architect. She was working in Paris after she graduated. She would have become a wonderful European architect, but got married. My sister never had a partner, had a very posh job, had the 100 pairs of shoes.
What did she do? Was she an architect?
No, she worked as a producer in the film business.
Oh, right.
Worked for American film companies. Had freedom, went on holidays, had a soft-top sports car. And my mum couldn't forgive her for that. Slightly different with me because I...
You were a boy.
Was a boy, academic father, narcissistic mother, so I have to be charming and handsome for the mother, and I have to be...
Just as well you were.
And I have to be hardworking and successful for the father. So perfect storm was when I started as an actor and became successful.
Very quickly.
Because I was good looking and whatever else. And this fact that Simon's death precipitated my leaving, I think I probably would have taken myself away anyway, because I realised I was just completely mirroring what was being put on to me.
And it wasn't coming
and it
from
wasn't mine.
internal.
It wasn't mine.
No, it was a huge performance.
Yeah, and I knew even at the time, I've got this extraordinary success, but it has brought no happiness at all with it. And it wasn't anything cataclysmic. It was just, I'm really interested by this. And in a way I thought, if I take myself away, someone will then step into these shoes and enjoy it. And I would rather have that than me.
Because I don't know what sense you make of it psychologically for yourself. In order for us to feel kind of joy or satisfaction from what we do and to have self-esteem from what we do, I think there is an external component of it that we want to be seen to be good at it. But the main kind of generator of that is something that we choose that can have been influenced by our parents. Because, we're interrelational. So I don't think we just decide internally, I'm going to kind of do this. So I think we're always influenced. But that it is as close a choice as this is as much as I know myself for who I am and the decision I'm making in my life for me now. And it sounds like yours was the reverse of that you had no kind of internal motivator or drive for it. You were just performing to meet their love and needs. And so you had to take yourself out.
I wanted to be an actor.
I wanted to be.
Yeah, I originally trained as an architect. And I really loved that. But I never wanted to be an architect. But I loved the training. I think everyone should do a year of architecture.
Well, yeah.
So it wasn't that I was pushed into something I didn't want to do. I absolutely wanted to do it.
And so that came from you?
That came from me, but I've always been slightly flippant about the job I do. And it's interesting who I'm with at the moment, because my wife is an actor and she takes it very seriously. And her parents were actors and they took it very seriously. And it can be a very serious thing.
Business.
It is. But it's a serious thing that we're presenting stories, almost always morality tales. We're like the old mummers, and we're saying, look, if you do this, this will happen. So it's a very needful thing. Whether we have to take it as far as some of the Eastern thought of that were the sacrificial lambs for society or whatever, you can, whatever gets you up in the morning. I didn't have that kind of drive to
make a difference in the world.
needing to explore the human condition.
You're doing it now.
But I'm doing it now.
Somehow you treated acting as a game, as a sort of jolliness. Is that, have I got that?
Yeah, and it has to be a jolliness.
But more lightly, not.
But I had a very light
as a
touch.
mission
No, absolutely
drive.
not. No. And I was never going to be the guy who would do 18 months at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I didn't force myself to have to play Hamlet before I was 30. None of that was important at all.
If I join up the dots of the transgenerational patterns and trauma of multiple generations, is that when your sister died, which was a death out of time, your response, in a way, was a multi-generation repair, or it feels like all the ruptures, the brokenness, the fragmentation, the fury, the dissatisfaction that happened before, you unconsciously probably, I don't know, you can tell me, decided I'm going to meet this head on, and I'm going to meet it with love, and I'm going to meet it, allow myself to feel the suffering, I'm going to allow myself to feel the pain, and be all of who I am and not an escapee.
Yes, it started actually a little bit earlier because I also nursed out my dad and my mum a few years before my sister died. My dad being my dad, I'd been with him, we'd organised him. He chose to die just after I'd gone on holiday. As the wheels touched in Egypt, he died.
That happens, doesn't it? That people die
course.
when you leave the room.
Yeah,
my mum died when I went to boil an egg for
Yeah.
breakfast. I've been with her all night.
Yeah. And it was very dad and absolutely right. I was with my mum when she died. I'd been with her for a few months before that. Their deaths then allowed me to properly sort out a lot of stuff. And I took myself away to a rehab in Arizona, the Meadows.
Yeah. It's very good, the middle.
And I did the survivor's course there.
Not because you were drinking.
No. It's all the child stuff.
The child repair. So when they died, it opened up in you the space that you could really explore what being their child, how that shaped you.
I'd already started exploring quite a bit anyway. I'd started exploring when my wife and I had a child, and it wasn't easy to have a child. She was IVF, and then it failed again, and we were in
A lot of losses.
extremis. We really were in a horrible place.
Very, very painful.
But the fact that I'd started the exploration meant I was able to go to the Meadows, which is pretty full on.
It's very intense.
But I was able to meet the requirements of what was asked of me there by having done the various bits of work leading up to that. I would not have been able to look after my sister had I not done the work.
Tell us what that work involved, some of it.
Well, all of the work from the very start, the exploration, the work that you do, is or was for me I equate it to just carrying a rucksack of rocks
Stone.
around. And this is the rucksack that we're given to carry. And we lug it around, and it exhausts us, and it slows us down. And we never think to take it off and have a look what's
in the
inside.
stones?
And it was just gently starting to say, you can take this bag off. You do know that.
It doesn't have to be yours to carry.
Should we have a little look? Look inside. See what you're carrying. What's this? Is that yours? No. Okay, well, let's just put that over there. Is that yours? No. Let's put that over there. Is this yours? That's
right.
not mine, but I quite like that. Okay, well, let's put that over there. And then you lay all this stuff out, and you start to talk about the various weights that you've been carrying. And you go, actually, can I put that back in? Wow.
That feels
Wow.
looser,
Ooh,
different.
I like this.
It's energizing rather
Yeah.
than...
I'm going to leave all this stuff here. Is that all right? Absolutely. Do you want? Should we dig a little hole?
Because I don't think you can forget those rocks, because they're
No,
in
no, no,
you,
no, 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 absolutely
but
not.
you don't have to carry them.
No, absolutely not. And of course then the physical manifestation of that is clearing out the houses of my dad and my mum and my sister. Because those are the rocks as well. And you look at this stuff and you go, none of this is mine. None of this is mine. And actually, gosh, with my sis, God bless her, she was carrying an awful lot of stuff.
Which is
that
maybe she
needed
didn't
to
have a partner,
have been
didn't
jettisoned.
have kids.
Yeah, and she wasn't able to explore. And Meadows was sort of the culmination of that. It was an unbelievably poignant and privileged space to be in, because I was there with a lot of addicts who were there locked up as part of the program, who had to do this as part of the program. It's a week's course called Survivors, and it was...
One sort of links the word survivors with abuse, but...
Yeah. But again, it was an extraordinary privilege to be. I think there was about 8 of us in the space, and you see the tells, you see the manifestations.
There was a woman there who absolutely talked. She couldn't get anything
Like a rock in her
lower than the throat.
And
Cut off.
by the end of the week,
She still couldn't get lower than the throat.
and we all knew, mate, you've got to try and find this voice.
Yeah, but,
Tummy
yeah,
voice. God bless you. And it just
Your
it wasn't able to lower. And of course, that work I carried on.
Good for you.
But that gave me
You're an explorer.
I'm an explorer. It gave me can we say ammunition? That's a brutal word. It gave me whatever
For the life force.
was required to then walk alongside, bear witness, support, help my sister. And I would not have been able to do it without that. And the therapy I have undertaken has been the best work I've ever done in my life, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
That's a beautiful thing for a therapist to hear.
Yeah. As my missus says, the fact that we've been together nearly 30 years is the thing she's most proud of, because it hasn't been easy.
I was thinking about your missus and your relationship, and one sort of varying different identities, and that one of the ways of thinking about a relationship and a marriage is that you face the reality of who you are and work as you have done as an explorer to kind of develop yourself, grow yourself through difficulties and adversities, and that your partner has done too.
Mm-hmm.
And then you create this third entity that is the marriage.
Mm.
And so that you put in to the marriage the good and the bad of yourself, and that part of kind of the work of marriage is loving who each other is rather than who we'd like them to be, and facing that reality.
Mm-hmm.
But you two, because she's a very well-known actor, have a kind of fourth pressure, it feels to me, of both being well-known and being well-known in different ways. And that is a pressure that luckily most of us don't have. And I wonder how you navigate the kind of public space of people's judgments of you being out, whether if she's recognised, you're not recognised, you're recognised, she's not recognised, all of that navigation as a couple.
Well, we are the ultimate mirrors.
What does that mean?
In what we are, because people project.
Yes, people project themselves onto you.
Mm-hmm. Completely. We have to have the separation of church and state. It's that simple. We actually lead very quiet lives, apart from when we're not leading very quiet lives. We are, I think, blessed in the fact that we both have done the work. We would not have survived had we not both done the work.
And doing the work means seeing yourselves and what gets in the way of yourself and processing it, not necessarily getting rid of it, but knowing what that is, knowing yourself better.
Yeah, and I did the bulk of my work in absolute extremis, and now I do it as housekeeping, because there's always going to be stuff.
Yeah, that always.
I'm writing a book on grief at the moment, the griefs that I've experienced in my life, and have to check in with myself and have to check in with the therapist regularly, just to explore the goodness me. I'm quite interested by that. I thought that was sorted. That's not sorted, is it? Okay. Should we have a little look
It's
about
maintenance.
It's maintenance.
It's like we oil cars.
Absolutely.
We take them
what I call
for an
housekeeping.
MOT.
Yeah.
Is your housekeeping.
Yeah.
Psychological, marital,
yeah.
life housekeeping.
Yeah.
It's a lovely idea.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to meet the president of the Cognitive Behavioural Therapists Association to talk with him about what I still see as the mad reticence of the Brits to discuss therapy, to go to therapy. I'm still asked when I do interviews, not so much now, but very much so. I read somewhere that you've done therapy.
As if you're a real weirdo.
As if I'm a necrophiliac.
Which obviously
or
you
something.
are.
And I'm fascinated by that. I mean, I'm a true northern man about going to a doctor.
You have to be dying.
I've had mad holes, bone-showing holes in me, and I've said, "No, it's fine. Just wrap some blue roll around it. It's fine." And I was absolutely like that with talking therapy for a long while, until I realised that the pain I was in was obviously far greater than any pain that would be unleashed by me exploring it.
That the pain you were in was far greater than any pain you'd face by exploring. That's a big realisation.
Yeah. And it is painful. It's painful because an awful lot of what I carry, and I'm sure most people carry when they have a good old dig, sits in your very kernel, and you've got to open up and get the light in. And these things will fight like buggers for you not to, and people will fight you not to take their pain away, because the pain gives people their shape, gives them their identity. And I was one of those, absolutely, completely.
So now you're writing in this new shape that you find yourself to be, which is by allowing yourself to feel the pain and not blocking the pain with busyness, with acting, with performance, with acting out, with all of the things that we use. Kind of, it's more like you're in touch with your raw self, your kind of natural self that is being reshaped and dented and scarred by experiences.
We are all kintsugi.
Yes, broken with the Japanese pots that are put together with gold.
The gold lacquer. And we are the shape we are through the breakages of bone and heart, and the holes, and the rips and the tear. The hole that was my sister that was ripped out of me is absolutely there. It's slightly less jagged, but it makes me the unique self that I am. All these broken fingers make me the unique self that I am.
Yeah.
The great holes in my legs. And the fact, the point of kintsugi is that you love the thing enough that you can't imagine not having it, so you will repair it.
With gold.
And the repaired piece is more beautiful than the original, perfect piece.
And you say that with such tenderness.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely believe it. We are all physical manifestations of the kintsugi. And the fueling of this new chapter that was the death of my sister is that completely. And I know that the trauma of the experience of being with her, there was no one else around for the last 3 months, just me and her. The trauma is absolutely balanced by the privilege of it. And I knew that at the time. And the fact that I was able to do something that I didn't think or didn't know I could do, and survived, only just, but survived.
Very much on the edge there.
And that has brought with it, I am more grateful, I am kinder, I am more loving, I'm more compassionate. I know I can do difficult things, and that is all because of that. And I think I'm interested in exploring in the grief at the moment. I think until one is able to have a relationship with one's own pain, you can't see anyone else's. And I think I'm a bit too far down the road of empathy, but got to be careful. You've got to be careful if you're an empathic. But I can see people's pain.
So, I mean, you make a great therapist, by the way. if there's another profession
I would have loved to have been a therapist.
You'd have been great.
Yeah.
I mean, you are one in a way. I mean, I don't think we have to be trained to be a therapist. I get shot for saying that. Maybe I have to reframe that, is that you have a natural capacity to form relationships and form meaningful relationships very quickly, like you have with me here. We've never met. No. And I kind of feel like you've opened your heart kind of really fully. I think it's very profound. What you recognize in yourself is by being in relationship with your own pain and your own experiences, enables you to open your window of tolerance, it's called in the trade, to meet and see somebody else where their pain is. Yeah. And in meeting them and being empathic with them, they come towards you, and then you have this lovely kind of co-created connection that goes very deep, very fast.
Yeah. It's actually quite extraordinary, the amount of times I will be sitting with someone and they'll say, "I've never said that before. I've never told anyone that." And I feel such privilege to be able to hold a space that's just about being there and available. That's all it is. And listening. I was terrible at listening. We're all terrible at listening. My lovely friend Catherine Mannix has just written a book called Listen.
Yeah.
Do you know Catherine?
I know. Well, yeah, we've done a lot together.
Her.
Yeah.
I love her.
We're the two kind of grief people that come in as a double act.
Yeah. Well, she and I found ourselves on the circuit together with her first book,
Yeah.
With the End in Mind.
Great book.
And we became this wonderful double act. She was a professional, I was the idiot, which is really useful together.
Hardly the idiot.
No, but the non-professional, the lived
I think
experience
you
one.
spoke for the experience, which is really the expert on the grief itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, as you're sitting here, and I'm sure people listening can sense it, there's a steadiness in you that I can kind of feel viscerally in my body that means that I don't feel fearful. I feel like I can go anywhere with you. I could kind of lob a judo kick at you.
Yeah.
Although physically I'm not really able to do that. And so there is something how you've built your robustness through the pain that has given you a capacity to, I imagine, have joy too.
Oh, yeah. But I don't know if I had proper joy before I did the work on the grief. I don't think it's possible. I think your bandwidth is so narrow, so you don't go super deep depressed, but you can't go until you can mind down. I don't think you can go up. And I feel the same because I do a lot of talking and writing about death as well, and I don't think you can live properly until you have a relationship with death at all. I mean, I love the counterintuitive nature of it. Of the
paradox, the two things are true. And I think at some level, our kind of emotional bandwidth is expanded when we allow ourselves to feel the pain. It allows an emotional bandwidth to feel joy, to feel happiness. And both of those come from not aiming for it, but from a spontaneous response to recognizing that we're alive, knowing that we're going to die.
Yeah, yeah. And knowing that we will always be in grief. I mean, I talk constantly about so many things that are deeply painful, and I'm able to talk about it because that's what I do. And I find myself suddenly unable to speak. And I'm intrigued and I'm grateful because it's still there and it still fuels. And it shows I'm alive and present. And you say robust, there has to be a robustness, but I think what I've felt actually is taking away the robustness.
I mean, I can see the tears in your eyes as you're remembering Claire, and I'm sure your mum and
everything,
dad and everything, the losses of trying to have a baby, and that there is, to use Catherine's word, tenderness in that. But there is also an openness that is, I think Christian Neff talks about fierce compassion. I think there can be a fierce openness that feels raw and tearful, but isn't a collapse. It feels like it's an open.
I'm the big boys don't cry
brigade
lot,
but no more. Greg-wise, no more.
And it's gloriously powerful to be able to talk and to start weeping. It's fantastic. It's wonderful.
And you have a big role. There's a lot of men that need to be listening to you.
That's why I'm writing the book. Yeah, completely. It shows I'm alive and that time is finite, so let's have proper conversations as well. That's the thing that death brought with it for me. It's this thing that, I don't know, I think I was probably with Catherine, we were talking at a hospice, and the chap who ran it said the worst thing you can do to a dying person is waste their time. I would pull that thought back a little bit. The worst thing you can do to anyone is waste their time. Time is short. Let's talk properly. Let's listen to each other. Let's connect. That's all. That's all we have. We just have these little moments. That's all it is. That's all life is.
And that feels like a real moment of connection for me, and a wonderful place to stop the conversation, although I kind of feel we could talk for days.
We could talk for days, but it's been glorious.
It's been a really
Thank you so much.
Meaningful conversation. Thank you so much.
How beautiful.
It was really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for not wearing the eye patch.
You can borrow it.
That was so good. It really was.
Need to give you a hug.
Very good.
Well, that was all we should be doing.
Can I get a snap
Yes.
of you two?
We'll have a picture of a hug. I look like his granny that has been going into a hug.
Come into the home to give Granny a hug.
So here we are, Emily and Sophie, our mother-daughter segment of the podcast, talking about Greg Wise, the actor and campaigner and author. And this is an in-person recording, so I kind of felt the emotional quality of it is deeper, but I wondered what your thoughts were.
It was sort of lovely to hear. There was a lot of alignment, wasn't there, between both of your kind of ways of thinking and relating about grief, and that being so central to, obviously, to your work, as everyone knows. But I actually personally didn't know that he was kind of in that pool doing that kind of talks. There's something incredibly helpful, I think, about men coming forward and really sort of almost as a testimony, I was thinking, of that going through it is worth it. That, like, there are, even though it can be incredibly painful, your way of being in the world is really rewarded. The richness of your life and your emotional life and your relationship life, there are rewards for sort of leaning into the pain.
I think he kind of felt them.
Yeah, and he sort of talked a bit about a kind of, reticence about going to therapy. And I do think that is changing. I do think that is different. I think women have always been more open to therapy. But I think men are increasingly, and I think part of that is also an age divide. I think the younger generations, on the whole, and I think sort of varied by demographic and economic status and various other things, I do think young men are more open to talking about mental health and being open to therapy than, like, when Greg was that age.
That's really good. One of the things that I found interesting and I wanted to talk to you about is that when he said that creativity happens at the edges, I was kind of really wondering about that. Is that, does one get one's new ideas, or does one's imagination lift and explore when, is it outside of yourself or in a place that you haven't been before? I wondered what you thought about that.
I think it's a really interesting question. And my guess is that people operate differently. Like, I used to get, I really love books and I really love reading. And I used to get obsessed with those sort of magazine articles that sort of talk about a writer's day. And you'd have some writers that were like, I start at 9 o'clock and then I do however many hours, and then I have my lunch, and then I go for a walk, and then I do 2 more hours. And then you had the others who'd be like, I don't really have a routine at all. I sort of start in the middle of the night and everything is sort of flowing and I can't be forced. So, I do think part of it is temperament, like where our kind of energy flows. Some people need containment and some people need freedom. But I think creativity requires openness than anything.
Yes.
And maybe that comes from being on the edge where you feel really, really alive. But I don't think it requires that. I think it does require a sort of internal freedom. And I think, you do get people who are extremely happy and extremely sad, and then one of the things that they're worried about like medication or something like that is like, am I going to lose that? Am I going to lose
the extreme, the
creativity, the energy that I get from being really, really high, but then I have the consequences of being really, really low? And I think
people on bipolar medication, they like the
Exactly.
highs, and that's why they often stop taking the medication, because they don't like the flat line. Yeah.
Right. But actually, I think, to paraphrase Greg, if you are somebody who's engaged in the work, like the sort of the pain, the examining of your experience, it is that actually that creativity can come out of force even more when you're also stable.
When you were speaking, what I was reminded of with me is that when I write, I often ask myself a question before I go to sleep, and I hope that my unconscious and my dreams are going to come up with an answer. And sometimes I have a thought that I didn't know that I had when I wake up. But also my best thoughts for writing was when I'm on my bicycle. So it's when I'm moving, and it's when I'm not sitting at my laptop trying to find the words. It's sort of...
It's flowing. It's like a movement.
Flowing. Yeah. And then I had to speak it into my phone. Otherwise I'd forget it. But so, yeah.
I really agree. I think that there's the story of the kind of unhappy creative. I had a flatmate for a long time, and he used to say, I'm worried if I become happy, I will stop being creative. He was an actor and sort of director, which then, exactly as you described, became very untrue. That actually the more he became, the more focus he had, the more energy he had to give, because he wasn't preoccupied and trying to also manage his emotional life in the same way. I think in a more broad sense of creativity, rather than like the individual, I think there is something about a synthesis that happens when two things meet that don't usually meet. So like there's like a biodiversity metaphor where the greatest diversity is between two habitats, like between woodland and grassland, between lake and grass. And it's where this kind of like mixing happens, where you get this broad diversity. And I think that happens, isn't it? We see it between arts and science. When someone comes along, sometimes with quite a different kind of brain, or has come to it from a different cultural angle that hasn't been there before, that is able to rearrange an idea and present it in a new idea or create a new one. So I think there is something maybe at the edges, in the less known spaces where things meet, that something new can be born, can't it?
Yeah, and I think maybe it also connects to what he was talking about, or this sort of sense of being open to being like fully alive with all of your being, and that requires also being open to the pain of that. So it's like open in all senses, and maybe there's an intensity to that, isn't there? There's an intensity of being fully in connection with like the awe of, you know, looking at the sky or being in a forest. I don't think that necessarily means you have to live like an extreme, like obviously that works for him, sort of extreme
Rock
hiking,
climbing,
extreme,
yeah.
yes. But I don't think that's necessary. I think you can be open to awe and fully open, and also be totally happy not rock climbing.
What did you think about the transgenerational patterns and that kind of metaphor of looking in your rucksack and looking at the rocks and taking out the rocks that aren't yours and keeping the bits that kind of work for you?
I think it's a really lovely image, isn't it? It's very helpful in terms of feeling quite concrete about what is this process that I'm trying to go through. I think one of the thoughts I had, and I've had it in quite a lot of episodes, is that often people come onto our podcast kind of in a way when they've come out the other side of crisis or change.
They're sort of resolved, or
and then you get to write the story that makes sense about what happened. But when you're in it, when it's
messy,
live, it's
crazy.
so you have no idea if you're in a growthful process or if you're nose diving towards disaster. And so it certainly often doesn't feel like taking rocks out in this quite like clear, like, I take this rock and I think the feeling is like often ugly and messy, and you can do damage on the way to as you're trying to figure things out because you're changing how you're relating. And I think it's easy to come onto the podcast and think, oh gosh, they've all figured it out. But none of the people come in the middle of it when everyone's going, I don't know.
Except at some level, I mean, I think that's true, except at some level we're constantly figuring it out.
For sure. Life is messy. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about intergenerational, like it really is extraordinary when you start to think about it and you see patterns in your life, and that sometimes, however hard you're trying, whatever you're doing, however conscious you are, however much therapy you've had, I have definitely been in a situation where I'm like, wait, what? How am I, like, what? How am I repeating this thing
that my bloody mum did?
That my bloody mum did. Or just these sort of, like, these patterns, or like, there's been a couple of situations in my life where I've been like, how, that feels like the actual events replicated past things that happened intergenerationally. And I've just sort of like, my mouth has been slightly like, how have I got to this place where the same thing that sort of happened to be this sort of happening again, when I feel like I've done so many, I'm a really different person, I've done lots of different things, and yet somehow this cycle is repeating. And then obviously what you do with that can be really different, like you can have different choices in that. But I think the power of those cycles is really strong.
Yeah, and that's something that shows up a lot, doesn't it, in if you end up in a long-term partnership with someone, how often somehow mutually you recreate something that is left unresolved in your own life that you haven't dealt with. And it sometimes feels like magic, not in the good sense necessarily. And they're like, what? Yeah. And we think we're choosing one thing, and then you end up thinking, no, it's something else. And it can be incredibly powerfully healing if you then resolve that, because you have been met with the thing that was unresolved. But obviously it's also very hard.
And it's something that happens all the time in the therapeutic relationship that is, to me, sort of endlessly fascinating and often really, really rich, where you've been working with a client for a while, you think, like, I think we're getting somewhere, this feels quite rich, this feels quite challenging, and then sort of something will happen and you're suddenly like, oh gosh, like this is literally just repeated, whether it's to do with an ending, whether it's to do with the crisis, whether it's to do with, I work with children, so I also work with their families, and something happens in the family system and you're suddenly like, like suddenly we actually have just replayed something, and this is if it's possible, which it isn't sadly always possible, but like this is an amazing moment to sort of pause and think about what's actually happening here, and can we do something different at this juncture. It comes up a lot with endings.
One of the things that kind of just came up for me was when he was talking about this liminal space, the edges and his and aliveness. I was thinking about the sort of, it's always a bit, it's not very helpful to get binary generally, is it? But like sometimes what comes into the therapy room or can happen in relationships is people do quite extreme things, which I don't think at all is where Greg is coming from. But that's the point of differentiating things in order to feel alive, to fight back essentially what is a feeling of deadness. So like quite extreme risks, or I really remember listening to Esther Perel and her say, the sort of relationship sex therapist that's incredibly well known, and her saying the number one thing that people say to her about why they had an affair is it made them feel alive. That it wasn't really about necessarily about their relationship or person they love or what was going on in their life. It was a sort of feeling of deadness, right? Which is why it can come up in that kind of midlife crisis moment in life of, is this it? And how we have this drive to really be able to feel, but sometimes we take it because we're not really aware that that's the process going on. We can take quite risking or damaging decisions just to get that feeling
of aliveness. It's a really good point. It
Yeah.
makes me think of quite a lot of my clients right now, actually. Not about the affairs, but about the aliveness, about you'll do, I think, feeling, or like in the sort of polyvagal sense of being frozen, I think feeling dead is sometimes one of the worst feelings. We think about pain and psychological pain and physical pain, but actually feeling dead when you can't connect with yourself and you feel kind of dead to the world, dead to yourself is a really horrible place to be in. And you can see how it's really very seductive to have sex to come alive, because it's like giving birth, Stace, in some ways, and it's the opposite force.
and novelty.
And novelty, yeah. And that I think the other thing that she talked about, which is again a fight against deadness, is that you become a different version of yourself with this other person. Whereas you get in a very familiar, like we talked about, in patterns in couple relationships.
And you can be parts of yourself you maybe don't give yourself permission to be in your everyday life. You can, and that makes you feel alive. But then it's how to integrate that back into your life so you don't have to go outside your life to feel it.
Yes.
To be
Exactly.
it.
So thank you, Emily and Sophie. And particularly thank you to Greg Wise, who has done incredible work in the field of grief. And I really appreciate him for that and for coming and having the conversation with me. And I really appreciate all of you listening. And as I always say, do please share this if you think someone would benefit from it. And do rate and subscribe so other people can find us. And until next time, thank you.